So just look for resources in your city. They're out there. So I only really familiar with the ones here in Atlanta, but I know that if you just look for yoga in the park, they're throwing block parties. They're doing things where they're teaching these techniques where you can come together and practice yoga with other yogis that are willing to teach you, how to do this basic yoga, which can be so impactful to your mental health.
Absolutely. That's amazing. Those are amazing tips. And those are like readily available tips that you can access. You spoke earlier about in terms of the quarantine as it pertains to like being in a relationship, if you're married or, if you have a partner, whatever. What are some, suggestions would you say, even as people are going through those type of tense relationship, like what are some suggestions would you say that people can use in terms of, again, mental wellness, keeping in that same vein?
Of course. So one thing that I think is really beneficial is learning how to do self-care routines together. So it's necessary for you to figure out what self-care routines are going to be impactful to you, right? Because your mental health is going to be such a huge part of the relationship that you're in. It's necessary for you to be in a good space. But here's the thing: it's okay not to be in a good space, because it's unrealistic to think that we're always going to be in this great space, right?
Yes.
But you just need to know the necessary self-care routines is going to get you back to par, like back to feeling good. And what's been very beneficial in my own relationship is doing these self-care regimens together. So maybe taking 5-minute meditations together. So usually I will sit in silent meditation by myself for about 30 minutes. But I think that it's been very impactful to my relationship to also sit in meditation with my spouse. Talk about the things that you're feeling. Share what's happening with you in terms of your mental health with your partner. You want to get to a level where you're comfortable enough to share the things that you're feeling, the things that you're experiencing, because you don't want to suffer in silence and your partner or your spouse not know what's happening. So I think a good way to make sure that you're doing healthy things inside of the relationship is to share what's happening in terms of your own mental health. And also do a check-in with your partner. Check on their mental health. Ask how they're doing today. Ask, how are you feeling? I know that we've been stuck in this quarantine. We've been without work. There's so many things that's happened and changed in the course of our own career. Talk about it. Share what's happening in your relationship. Talk about what's happening in terms of your mental health. Talk about what's happening in your job, in your workspace, how you're feeling about working from home. Any changes that you're having, share that with your partner, share that with your spouse, because that's going to be so important, not only to their mental health, but to your mental health. Do self-care regimens together. Read a book together, maybe a book on relationships. Maybe you both are dealing with a level of stress. Read a book on stress. Talk about the things that are going to be impactful that you can do together, because there's no better way than to do a self-care regimen, but with your partner if you're in a relationship. That's a beautiful way to kind of build a deeper connection, especially if you're having, some difficulties there. And look, we all go through it, especially if you're married. I'm married. Marriage isn't perfect. You're going to have to learn how to, get through difficult times together. And a lot of times that could be dealing with those difficulties together, talking about it, being open and honest, honest about what you're feeling. Maybe we've spent too much time together because we're in here in quarantine, we're locked together. Maybe we need a little bit of alone time. So figure out ways that you can do that now that we're coming out of quarantine. So maybe you're able to, have a little bit of distance now, but just make sure that you're doing the necessary self-care routines together and by yourself to make sure that you're in a good and healthy space.
Oh my gosh, girl, we got to have you back on. I mean, this is perfect. Like you were literally dropping gems. And I like that. It's crazy. I never thought about that. That definitely, connecting with your partner in a deeper way, that can really, that really amplifies everything. And that really shows genuine love. Like you are able to, but I must say it has to be a safe space in order to, right?
Yes.
It has to, It has to be a safe space in order to connect on that deeper level and really get in tune with each other's feelings.
Right.
Yeah.
And if it's not a safe space, that's a great topic. That's something to talk about, that maybe I haven't felt that this is a safe space for me to verbalize how I'm feeling or what's happening. So maybe that's something you guys need to talk about. There are so many things out there in terms of resources, books, workbooks that you can work through together to kind of deal with those necessary difficult topics and things to talk about. So even if it's not a safe space, maybe you can verbalize that. Maybe that's something you guys can tackle and talk about, because it's a relationship. So you want to make sure that you're being just as honest and open as you can be, because honesty, trust are the things that's going to help us grow in this partnership. And if you don't have trust because you don't feel that the space is safe, that is something that you definitely can deal with. That's something that you can talk about. So maybe before we deal with the things that are happening, maybe we need to deal with the fact that it's not a safe space, or it hasn't been. Maybe we need to deal with the traumas that have caused us to get to this space, or the things that have caused us to get to this space where I feel that it's not a safe space. Or maybe I don't feel it's a safe space because I don't trust it from things that have happened in my past. Maybe it's a personal thing. So I think that when you're dealing with all of those types of things, you have to kind of be open and honest about that, because if it's not a safe space because it's something personal that you've dealt with, express that if you're able to. Let that be something that you talk about, so you can better navigate these difficult waters sometimes that arise in relationships. Yeah.
And as you navigate it, you explore it, and you become a more wholesome human being, because you're, like you said, you're doing the work. And I think it's a beautiful thing when we are continually evolving. But like you said, having these conversations many years ago, we never used to be so open, especially in communities of color, having conversations about feelings and how I'm being treated. Like we rug, especially in Black communities or households. I'm Caribbean, so a lot of times, issues, they just get swept. They get swept under the rug, and they amplify and they manifest in so many different ways. And that's why I think it is so imperative that we really break generational setbacks. I don't want to say curses, but generational setbacks. We have to be different from our ancestors. We have to have this communication. Keisha, as we close out, because we are speaking about relationship in terms of mental wellness, statistics have shown that through this quarantine, many friendships also have been challenged. So as we close, what would you say to anyone that's going through that transition where they have friends, they have really dear friends, but, the issues of quarantine and isolation has really, impacted their friendship? What would you say to someone that's going through that as well?
Of course. So just like any relationship, you have to feed any relationship that you're in, right? And sometimes in the midst of our friendship, we'll have friends that are really suffering or have really suffered, especially through this pandemic, especially if they've lost loved ones or lost jobs, or they just have gotten, to this space where they too are dealing with their own mental health issues. I think a beautiful way to address difficulties that are coming up in friendships is also through honesty, but more than anything, invite your friend to this space that you're trying to get to. If I'm working on my mental health, I'm going to be very verbal about that, or maybe I will choose to be very verbal about that with my friend, so they too can kind of really think about the things that I'm doing. So maybe it can motivate them to also start doing some of these self-care things to make sure we're in a healthy space. Because what I'm learning about relationships, period, is relationships are going to start with you, right? Because you're going to be one part of that relationship. And if you want that relationship to thrive, it's really important that you're doing the necessary work to make sure that you're in the healthiest space possible. And like I said, sometimes we're going to be in spaces where we just need a moment. We need a moment to kind of navigate through our own troubles or what it is that we're dealing with. Then be verbal about that with your friend. Be verbal about you needing that time to step away from the friendship so you can better focus on yourself. Because when you're able to focus on yourself, you're able to come back to the friendship and be a really integral part of that relationship, right? A really beneficial part. Really, you're one half of that love. You're one half of the thing that's going to make that relationship work. So it's really important to make sure you're doing or taking the necessary steps to work on you, so you can be really healthy in that friendship, so it can continue to flourish, right? So you can continue to grow old and have a lovely relationship. So it's just important to make sure that you're doing the necessary work. And that's just my best advice, because a lot of us, we tend to look at the other person, right? We tend to point out all of their flaws, all the things that they're doing wrong. But a lot of times those relationships are a reflection of us. So our friendships, our love relationship, oftentimes are a reflection of